The pen felt heavy in his hand. 17 years old, sitting in the principal's office, and he was about to sign away what everyone said was his future. The form in front of him had big letters at the top that read, "Official withdrawal from high school." His hand was shaking, not because he was scared, but because he knew what this meant. No prom, no graduation ceremony, no college applications. Just done. The principal looked at him with that expression adults get when they think you're making the biggest mistake of your life. "You're throwing away your potential," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Do you understand that without a diploma, your options are extremely limited?" He nodded, but he wasn't really listening anymore. He'd heard this speech from his teachers, his relatives, even the school counselor who called him in last week for a serious conversation. What they didn't understand was that he didn't have a choice. Not really. His mom was working 16-hour days, juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His little sister was only 12, and she needed someone home when she got back from school. Someone had to step up, and since his dad left 3 years ago, that someone was him. He signed the paper. The principal sighed like she'd just watched him jump off a cliff. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. He didn't. He had no idea what he was doing. But staying in school, pretending everything was fine while his family fell apart, that wasn't an option either. Walking out of that building for the last time felt strange. Other kids were in class, living their normal lives, worried about test scores and who was dating who. He walked past the gym where he used to play basketball, past the cafeteria where he'd eaten lunch with his friends since freshman year. Those friends were still in there, probably talking about college visits and SAT prep courses. He wondered if they'd even notice he was gone. The next morning, he put on a button-up shirt and walked into Mike's Electronics Repair, a small shop downtown that always had a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The owner, an older guy with grease permanently under his fingernails, looked him up and down. "You know anything about fixing phones?" he asked. "I can learn," he replied. "Minimum wage. You start tomorrow," that's how it began. $8.50 an hour, standing behind a counter taking apart broken smartphones and laptops. The work wasn't hard, just repetitive. Customer comes in with a cracked screen, he replaces it. Customer comes in with a dead battery, he swaps it out, hour after hour, day after day. His hands started to move automatically, unscrewing tiny screws, disconnecting delicate cables, putting things back together. But here's the thing nobody tells you about working minimum wage when all your friends are in school. It's lonely. His old teammates would text him about practice. His friends would talk about the drama happening in chemistry class, and he'd be at the shop wearing a name tag, fixing someone's phone while they complained about how expensive the repair was. At night, after his sister was asleep and his mom finally got home from her shift at the hospital, he'd sit in his room with his laptop. He couldn't stop thinking that there had to be more than this. He started watching videos, not entertainment stuff, but tutorials, how to code, how to build websites, how to start a business. The people in these videos were his age, sometimes younger, and they were doing incredible things. They didn't talk about needing a diploma. They talked about solving problems and creating value. He'd watch until 2 or 3 in the morning, taking notes, trying to follow along. His eyes would burn from staring at the screen, but he couldn't stop. Something inside him kept saying, "This isn't it. This isn't how your story ends." His mom found him asleep at his desk one morning, laptop still open, surrounded by notebooks filled with codes and business ideas. She touched his shoulder gently. "Baby, you need to sleep," she said. He looked up at her, and he could see the tiredness in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped from carrying so much weight. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to figure this out. I promise you, dropping out won't be the worst decision I ever made. It's going to be the beginning of something." She didn't look convinced. How could she? Her son had just thrown away his education to work at a repair shop. But she kissed his forehead like she used to when he was little. "I believe in you," she said, even though he could tell a part of her was terrified. The hardest part wasn't the work or the long hours. It was the judgment. Family members would ask his mom in hushed voices, "What's he going to do with his life?" People at the store would make comments when they found out he was a dropout. "You should go back," they'd say. "Get your GED at least." And maybe they were right. Maybe he was making a terrible mistake, but every night he kept learning. He'd fix phones during the day and teach himself to build things at night. He learned basic programming, He figured out how to create simple websites. He studied how businesses worked, how money flowed, how successful people thought differently. It wasn't school, but he was getting an education anyway. 3 months after dropping out, he fixed his 100th phone at the shop. His boss gave him a 5-cent raise, $8.55 an hour. At that rate, it would take him about 20 years to make what his mom made as a nurse. 20 years to maybe afford a decent apartment. 20 years to stop living paycheck to paycheck. That night, staring at his notebook filled with everything he'd learned, something clicked. He wasn't going to climb someone else's ladder. He was going to build his own. He didn't know how yet. He didn't know if it would work. But sitting in that bedroom, surrounded by broken electronics and big dreams, he made himself a promise. 5 years. He'd give himself 5 years to make something of this crazy decision. 5 years to prove that dropping out wasn't giving up. It was just taking a different path. He opened his laptop and got back to work. 6 months into working at the repair shop, he started noticing patterns. Same problems, different customers, iPhones with charging port issues, laptops that overheated, tablets with ghost touch screens. He'd fixed the same problem probably 50 times. And each time the customer would say something like, why does this keep happening? Or is there a way to prevent this? The shop charged $75 for a basic repair. That seemed like a lot to him at first until he learned that the owner had to pay rent, keep inventory, pay him, and still make a profit. But customers didn't care about overhead costs. They just wanted their phones fixed and they wanted it to be cheaper. One evening, his sister's friend's mom called. Her laptop wasn't turning on, and she didn't want to drive 30 minutes to the repair shop. Is there any way you could just come look at it? She asked. I'll pay you. He told his boss he was leaving an hour early, drove to her house with his toolkit and fixed her laptop right there on her kitchen table. Loose battery connection. 10-minute fix. She handed him $40 and thanked him about 15 times. That's when the idea hit him. What if he did house calls? Cut out the shop's overhead, charge less than competitors but make more than his hourly wage. He could be his own boss, set his own schedule, and actually help people who couldn't easily get to a repair shop. The elderly, busy parents, people without cars. There was a whole market of people who needed help but couldn't access it easily. He spent the next 2 weeks building a website. Nothing fancy, just a simple page that said, Tech Repair, we come to you, with his phone number and a list of services. He used every free tutorial he could find, copying code, tweaking it, breaking it, fixing it again. His first website looked like it was made in 2005, but it worked. Then came the hard part, getting customers. He printed flyers at the library and put them up at community centers, grocery stores, anywhere with a bulletin board. He posted in local Facebook groups. He told everyone he knew. His mom mentioned it to her coworkers. His sister told her teachers. He even went door to door in his neighborhood, introducing himself and handing out business cards he designed and printed himself. The first week, his phone didn't ring once. The second week, one call. An older man needed help setting up his new tablet. He charged $30 and spent 2 hours patiently teaching the man how to use it. The man's daughter was there and she was so impressed that she posted about it on Facebook. That post got him 3 more customers. Month 2, he had 15 customers. Month 3, 32. He started getting calls while he was at the repair shop. During his lunch break, he'd drive to someone's house, fix their problem, and race back before his hour was up. His boss started noticing. You're distracted, he said. Your mind isn't here anymore. He wasn't wrong. Every minute at the shop felt like time wasted. He was making $8.55 an hour there, but $20 to $40 per house call. The math was obvious but scary. Quitting meant no guaranteed paycheck. No safety net. Just him, his toolkit, and a website that might stop generating calls tomorrow. He'd saved up about $3,000 from his side jobs. Not a lot, but enough to survive maybe 3 months if he was careful. His mom noticed he was staying up even later now, his phone always ringing, his calendar filling up with appointments. You're exhausted, she said one morning. I'm building something, he replied. The conversation he'd been avoiding finally happened at dinner one night. His sister was talking about her day. His mom was picking at her food and he just said it. I'm quitting the shop. Going full-time with the house call business. The room went quiet. His mom put down her fork. Baby, that's not stable. What if it doesn't work out? Her voice had that tremor in it, the one that came from years of financial stress. "Mom, I'm making more doing this than working for someone else. And it's growing. Every week I get more customers." She looked at him for a long time, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Fear versus hope. The safe choice versus the dream. "Okay," she finally said. "But if it doesn't work, promise me you'll find something stable." He quit the next day. His boss wasn't surprised. "Good luck, kid. You're going to need it," he said. And it didn't sound mean, just realistic. Walking out of that shop, unemployed by choice, was one of the most terrifying moments of his life. No backup plan. No safety net. Just faith in himself and a growing list of customers who needed their devices fixed. The first month on his own was chaos. He was his own secretary, technician, accountant, and marketing department. He'd wake up at 7, check messages, plan his route to minimize driving time, then spend the day going from house to house. Broken screens, virus removals, data transfers, Wi-Fi setup, whatever people needed. He'd get home at 8 or 9 at night, eat whatever his mom left him, then spend 2 more hours responding to emails and updating his website. The loneliness hit harder now. His old friends were starting their senior year, stressing about college applications and enjoying their last year of high school freedom. He'd see their social media posts about football games and parties and weekend trips. Meanwhile, he was spending Saturday nights organizing receipts and planning his schedule for Monday. No social life, no dating, no hanging out. Just work, but the money was coming in. $2,000 the first month. $4,000 the second. By month 4, he was making more than his mom made as a nurse, and she'd been doing that for 15 years. He paid his first salary to himself, handed his mom $1,000 to help with bills, and put the rest back into the business for better tools and advertising. The doubt came in waves, though. Late at night, when he was too tired to sleep, he'd wonder if he should have just stayed in school, gotten a normal job, followed the path everyone said was safe. Who was he to think he could build something from nothing? A dropout with no business degree, no connections, no resources except stubbornness and YouTube tutorials. But then his phone would ring again. Another customer. Another problem to solve. Another chance to prove that maybe, just maybe, the conventional path wasn't the only way forward. He was 18 years old, running his own business, and absolutely terrified that it could all disappear tomorrow. But he kept going anyway, because going back wasn't an option anymore. He'd burned that bridge the day he signed those withdrawal papers. The only direction left was forward. 8 months into running his own business, something happened that changed everything. He was at a small accounting firm, fixing their office computers when the owner started venting. "I'm so tired of dealing with tech issues," she said, watching him work. "Every month something breaks. The printer stops working, someone's email gets hacked, the internet goes down. And every time I have to stop working, find someone to fix it and hope they can come quickly." He'd heard variations of this complaint from dozens of small business owners. They all had the same problem. They needed tech support, but they couldn't afford to hire a full-time IT person. And calling someone every time something broke was expensive, unpredictable, and frustrating. They'd pay $100 here, $200 there, and it all added up with no way to budget for it. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. What if, instead of charging per visit, he charged a monthly fee? Small businesses would pay him a set amount every month, and in exchange, he'd handle all their tech issues. No surprise bills, predictable costs. And he'd have reliable, recurring income instead of wondering how many calls he'd get each week. He spent the next week doing research. How much would businesses pay? What services should he include? How many clients would he need to make this work? He created a simple package. $150 per month for unlimited tech support, including emergency calls, regular maintenance, and help setting up new equipment. For a small business, that was less than 2 typical repair visits. His first pitch was to that accounting firm owner. His hands were sweating as he explained the concept. She listened, asked questions, then said something he wasn't expecting. "When can you start?" She became client number 1. He told her to refer him if she was happy with the service, and she did. Within a month, he had 5 small businesses signed up. Within 3 months, 15. The monthly income became predictable. $750 per month per client. With 15 clients, that was over $11,000 monthly, and it was recurring. Even if he didn't get a single new client, that money would keep coming. But growth brought new problems he never anticipated. He couldn't handle 15 businesses by himself. Some weeks, 3 different clients would have emergencies on the same day. He'd be running around like crazy, fixing a server at a law office, then rushing to a dental practice to set up new computers, then heading to a restaurant to fix their point-of-sale system. He was making good money, but he was burning out fast. He made a decision that terrified him. He needed to hire someone. That meant payroll, taxes, training, trusting someone else with his business. He posted a job listing for a part-time tech assistant. $10 an hour to start. The first person who showed up for an interview had a computer science degree from the state university. This college graduate, with his fancy degree and technical knowledge, was interviewing with a 19-year-old dropout. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The guy named Kevin was clearly skeptical at first, but when he saw the client list, the steady work, and the potential to grow, he took the job. Having help changed everything. Kevin handled the routine maintenance visits while he focused on emergency calls and landing new clients. They were a good team. Kevin knew more about networking and servers, but he knew more about customer service and running a business. By the time he turned 20, he had 30 clients and 3 employees. He'd moved out of his bedroom and rented a small office space. Nothing fancy, just a room with desks and a place to store equipment. But it was real. He had business cards that said founder and CEO on them. He had a company bank account. He had employees who depended on him for their paychecks. The money was getting serious now. With 30 clients at an average of $175 per month, he was bringing in over $50,000 monthly in revenue. After paying his employees, rent, equipment, and other expenses, he was taking home about $20,000 a month. More money than he'd ever imagined having. His mom quit her second job. They moved from their cramped apartment to a small house with a yard. His sister got a tutor to help with math. The stress lines on his mom's face started to fade, but success brought new fears. Every morning he'd wake up worried. What if all his clients left? What if a big company moved into town and undercut his prices? What if he made a mistake that cost someone their business data? The bigger things got, the more there was to lose. He started having trouble sleeping, his mind constantly racing through worst-case scenarios. His competitors started noticing him too. One of the bigger IT companies in the city called and offered to buy his client list for $50,000. It was tempting. He could take the money, go to community college, get a degree, start over. Do things the right way, but something in him refused. He wasn't building this to sell out at the first offer. He was building it to prove something. To himself, to everyone who doubted him, to every kid who thought dropping out meant giving up. Instead of selling, he doubled down. He developed his own software to help manage client issues more efficiently. Nothing complicated, just a simple system where clients could submit support tickets online, and his team could track and prioritize problems. It saved hours of phone tag and made his team look more professional. Other small IT companies in different cities started asking if they could use his system. He started charging them a monthly fee for access. Suddenly he had a software business on top of his service business. His 21st birthday came and went. While old classmates were celebrating being legal drinking age, he was celebrating hitting 75 small business clients across 3 cities. He'd hired 2 more technicians and a part-time office manager. Monthly revenue was pushing past $100,000. He was making more in a month than his teachers made in a year. The kid who couldn't finish high school was running a 6-figure business, but there was a hollowness to it sometimes. He had money and success, but no real friends anymore. His employees were great, but they weren't his friends. They were his team. Every conversation had an undertone of him being the boss. The gap between his life and his old classmates' lives had grown so wide that they couldn't relate anymore. They stressed about finals and internships. He stressed about payroll and client retention. They were living in different worlds now. Still, when he looked at his mom's face, relaxed for the first time in years, or when he helped his sister buy a laptop for school without worrying about the cost, he knew it was worth it. The loneliness, the stress, the constant fear of failure. Worth it, because he'd done what everyone said was impossible. A high school dropout, barely old enough to legally drink, running a successful tech company, and he was just getting started. Everything was going perfectly. Too perfectly. He should have known something was about to go wrong. It was a Tuesday morning when his phone started blowing up. Not the usual customer calls, these were panicked. One of his biggest clients, a medical practice with 3 locations, had been hacked. Patient data was compromised. Appointment schedules were gone. Billing information was exposed. And it had happened through a vulnerability in the system he'd set up for them. His hands went cold. This wasn't just a broken computer or a slow internet connection. This was serious. Legal serious. Lawsuit serious. The kind of problem that could destroy everything he'd built. He drove to their office, his mind racing through every possible solution. The office manager met him at the door, and she was furious. "You told us we were secure. You promised our data was protected." He'd done his best with the knowledge he had, but his best wasn't good enough. He'd learned tech support from YouTube videos and trial and error. He'd never studied cybersecurity formally. Never took courses on HIPAA compliance. Never had someone check his work. He was a dropout playing in a world where one mistake could ruin lives, and now that mistake had happened. The next 72 hours were a nightmare. He barely slept, working with a cybersecurity expert he had to hire at $200 per hour to fix the breach and secure the systems. The medical practice had to notify all their patients. Local news picked up the story. "Data breach at local medical office" was the headline. His company wasn't named, but in a small business community, word travels fast. Within 2 weeks, 12 clients canceled their contracts. Almost 40% of his business gone. The clients who stayed were nervous, asking questions about security he couldn't confidently answer. His monthly revenue dropped from $100,000 to $60,000, and that number was still falling. His employees were worried. Would there be layoffs? Was the company going to survive? The lawsuit came a month later. The medical practice was suing him for negligence, claiming he'd misrepresented his expertise and failed to implement industry-standard security measures. They wanted $300,000 in damages, money he didn't have. His business account had about $80,000 in it, built up from months of good revenue. His lawyer, another expense he'd never budgeted for, told him the case could go either way. "You're young, self-taught, and you made promises about security without the credentials to back them up. That's not going to look good." He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his company collapsing, his employees losing their jobs, his mom going back to working double shifts, everything he'd built destroyed because he didn't know what he didn't know. The imposter syndrome he'd always pushed down came roaring back. Everyone had been right. He should have stayed in school, should have gotten a degree, should have learned properly instead of thinking YouTube videos were enough. His mom found him one night sitting in the dark, staring at his laptop screen. The numbers didn't lie. At the current rate, the business would be bankrupt in 6 months, even without the lawsuit. "Baby, talk to me," she said softly. He told her everything. The breach, the lawsuit, the clients leaving, the fear that he'd failed everyone who believed in him. She sat quiet for a moment, then said something he didn't expect. "Remember when you dropped out and you promised me you'd make it right? You didn't promise it would be easy. You didn't promise you'd never fail. You promised you'd make it right, so make it right." Simple words, but they hit different coming from her. The woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him a chance. If she still believed, maybe he could too. He made a decision. Instead of hiding from the problem, he'd face it head on. He called every remaining client and had honest conversations. "I made mistakes. I wasn't as knowledgeable about cybersecurity as I should have been. Here's what I'm doing to fix it." He hired that expensive cybersecurity expert full-time. Cost him $60,000 a year, money he could barely afford, but it was necessary. He had every single client's system audited and upgraded to military-grade security standards. He started taking real classes, online courses from MIT and Stanford about cybersecurity, network architecture, and data protection. No, they wouldn't give him a degree, but they'd give him knowledge. Real, tested knowledge from actual experts. He studied like his life depended on it because it kind of did. 4 hours of client work, 4 hours of studying every single day. The lawsuit settled after 4 months of negotiation. He paid the medical practice $75,000, nearly everything he had saved. His business account went from healthy to almost empty, but it was better than $300,000 and better than bankruptcy. The practice agreed not to pursue criminal charges and to keep the settlement terms confidential. Small victories. Rebuilding trust was harder than building the business in the first place. He had to prove to every client, every potential customer, that he'd learned from his mistakes. He became certified in cybersecurity. Actually certified, with credentials from recognized organizations. He implemented systems and protocols that went beyond industry standards. He made security his obsession, the thing he thought about day and night. Slowly, painfully slowly, clients started coming back. Not all of them, but some. New clients signed on, impressed by his transparency about what went wrong and how he'd fixed it. Most companies would have hidden the breach or made excuses, one client told him. You owned it and became better. That's the kind of person I want handling my systems. 8 months after the breach, he was back to 50 clients. Not the 75 he'd had at his peak, but enough to be stable. His team had shrunk from 8 people to 5, and he'd had to let go of people he cared about. Those conversations were brutal. Looking someone in the eye and telling them you can't afford to keep them. Watching their face fall, knowing they have bills and families. It never got easier. But there was something different about him now. The cockiness of early success was gone, replaced by something more valuable. Wisdom. He knew what he didn't know. He knew that confidence without competence was dangerous. He knew that growth without foundations was just a house of cards waiting to collapse. And he knew that failure, as painful as it was, had taught him more than success ever could. On his 23rd birthday, he looked at his business with different eyes. Smaller than it had been, but stronger. More knowledgeable, more careful, more real. His revenue was back up to $80,000 a month, but this time it was built on solid ground. He'd faced the worst thing that could happen to his business and survived. That knowledge gave him a different kind of confidence. Not the untested optimism of youth, but the earned confidence of someone who'd been knocked down and gotten back up. The climb wasn't over, but at least now he knew what he was climbing and how to do it safely. That was worth more than any amount of money. The email came on a random Wednesday afternoon. Subject line, Speaking Opportunity, Regional Tech Conference. He almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made him open it. A tech conference in the city was looking for speakers to talk about unconventional paths to success in technology. They'd heard about his story, the dropout who built a tech company. They wanted him to share his journey. His first instinct was to say no. Who was he to give advice? He'd almost lost everything. He'd made massive mistakes. But then he thought about the version of himself at 17, sitting in that principal's office signing those withdrawal papers, thinking his life was over. If that kid could have heard that things would work out, that the unconventional path was possible, maybe it would have helped. Maybe he could be that voice for someone else. He said yes. Standing backstage at the conference, waiting to go on, his hands were sweating more than they had before any client meeting. There were 300 people in that audience. Business owners, developers, students, entrepreneurs. He was 24 years old, about to tell them how a high school dropout built something real. The irony wasn't lost on him that half the audience probably had degrees he'd never earn. When he walked onto that stage, the nervousness faded. He just told the truth. He didn't sugarcoat it or make it sound glamorous. He talked about the loneliness of being 17 and watching everyone else move forward with their lives. About working minimum wage while teaching himself to code at night. About the fear of quitting his safe job to bet on himself. About building a business one customer at a time, learning everything through trial and error. And he talked about the failure, the data breach that almost destroyed everything, the lawsuit, the clients he lost, the employees he had to let go. Success isn't a straight line, he told them. It's a mess of failures and lessons and getting back up when you really, really don't want to. He could see people in the audience nodding, taking notes, some even wiping their eyes. After the speech, the questions came. How did you learn to code? How did you get your first clients? What would you tell someone thinking about dropping out? That last question made him pause. Dropping out isn't the success story, he said carefully. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you to leave school. But if you do, if you have to, or if you choose to, know that it's not the end. What you do after is what matters. The work you put in, the way you serve people, the way you handle failure. That's the story. A kid approached him after couldn't have been older than 17. He had papers in his hand, and when he got closer, the kid could see they were withdrawal forms from the local high school. I'm thinking about dropping out, the kid said quietly. Everyone says I'm throwing my life away, but I just feel like school isn't for me. Did you ever regret it? He looked at this kid, really looked at him, and saw himself 7 years ago. Lost, scared, but somehow certain he had to do something different. Every single day for the first year, he answered honestly. Some days even now. But regret isn't about the decision. It's about what you do with it. You drop out and give up? Yeah, you'll regret it. You drop out and outwork everyone who doubted you? That's different. He did something then that surprised himself. What's your number? The kid gave it to him. Come by my office Monday. I'll give you an internship. Unpaid at first, but if you prove yourself, it becomes real. You'll learn actual skills, not just theory. But you work hard, you show up, and you don't waste the opportunity. Deal? The kid's eyes went wide. Seriously? Seriously. But I'm not saving you. You save yourself. I'm just opening a door. That conversation stuck with him for days. He'd built something that mattered. Not just a business, but a path for someone else. He started thinking bigger. What if he could help more kids like that? Kids who didn't fit the traditional mold, who learned differently, who needed a chance more than a classroom. He launched something he called the Alternative Path Scholarship. $5,000 to young people who'd left traditional education to pursue entrepreneurship. Not a lot of money, but enough to help someone get started. Buy equipment, take courses, have a cushion while building something. He funded it himself at first. $25,000 a year to give 5 people a shot. The applications that came in broke his heart and inspired him at the same time. So many kids with drive and ideas, but no support system. His business kept growing, but differently now, more intentionally. He wasn't chasing rapid expansion. He was building something sustainable. His client list grew to 200 small businesses across 5 cities. He stopped doing the tech work himself and focused on strategy, security, and developing his team. He hired a proper business manager, someone with an actual MBA who could handle the things he'd been fumbling through. It was humbling to bring in people smarter than him, but it was necessary. The software he'd developed for managing client issues turned into its own revenue stream. Small IT companies across the country were licensing it. $29 per month per user wasn't much, but with 300 companies using it, that was another predictable revenue source. He hadn't planned to become a software developer, but problems had led to solutions, and solutions had led to opportunities. His 24th birthday came, and with it a milestone he'd once thought impossible. The business was valued at $8 million. A consulting firm had done the assessment for potential investors. $8 million for a company started by a dropout in his bedroom, with a broken laptop and a dream. His personal net worth crossed $1 million. Not from salary, but from equity in the company he'd built. He was officially a millionaire before 25. But the moment that mattered most wasn't the valuation or the bank account. It was watching his sister walk across the stage at her college graduation. She'd done everything right, stayed in school, got good grades, earned a scholarship, graduated with honors, everything he hadn't done. He'd paid for what the scholarship didn't cover. Room, board, books, spending money. She'd never had to work during college, never had to stress about money, because he'd dropped out and made it work. His mom was there too, retired at 53. Not because she was old, but because she didn't have to work anymore. He'd convinced her to stop after her birthday, had set her up with enough money to live comfortably. She'd cried, not understanding how this had happened, how her son, the one who'd broken her heart by dropping out, had somehow made everything okay, better than okay. That night after the graduation, his sister hugged him tight. "You know I couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You did this," he replied. "I just helped." She pulled back and looked at him seriously. "No, you showed me something. You showed me that there isn't just one right way. You did it your way and I did it mine, and we both got where we needed to be. That's what matters. The intern he'd hired, that 17-year-old kid from the conference, was working out well. The kid reminded him so much of himself. Hungry, scared, determined. The kid was learning fast, soaking up everything like a sponge. He'd put him on small projects, teaching him the basics, watching him grow. Maybe the kid would stay, become an employee, build a career. Maybe he'd leave and start his own thing. Either way was okay. That's what opening doors meant. You didn't control where people went through them. His company now employed 45 people. 45 families depending on the decisions of a college dropout. That responsibility never stopped being heavy, but he'd learned to carry it. Some of his employees had master's degrees. Some had certifications. Some, like him, had learned through doing. He didn't care about credentials anymore. He cared about competence, character, and commitment. Looking back at the path from that principal's office to here felt surreal. 7 years. He was 17 when he signed those papers, certain his life was over. Now he was 24, running a multi-million-dollar company, employing dozens of people, supporting his family, and helping kids who reminded him of himself. The journey hadn't been what anyone expected. Definitely not what he'd planned. But it was his. The doubters hadn't disappeared completely. Family members still sometimes asked when he'd go back to school. Strangers would question his advice because of his lack of formal education. And honestly, sometimes he still wondered if he'd done it right. If taking the conventional path would have been easier, safer, smarter. But then he'd look at what he'd built. Not just the business, but the person he'd become. The lessons failure had taught him. The resilience struggle had forged. The wisdom that no classroom could have given him. He kept the withdrawal papers from high school. They were framed in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that endings are often beginnings in disguise. That the path less traveled is harder, lonelier, and scarier, but it's still a path. That conventional wisdom isn't wrong, but it's not the only truth. And that sometimes the worst mistake you can make is the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever build. At night, when the office was quiet and everyone had gone home, he'd sometimes sit at his desk and think about that 17-year-old kid, the one who walked out of school thinking he'd failed. If he could go back and talk to that kid, what would he say? Probably something simple. Something true. It's going to be okay. Not easy, but okay. You're going to fail. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to want to quit 100 times. But you're also going to build something real. Something that matters. Something that's yours. So keep going. The story isn't over. It's just beginning. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. Your path doesn't have to look like everyone else's. Your timeline doesn't have to match theirs. Your definition of success can be different. As long as you're moving forward, learning, growing, and staying true to who you are, you're exactly where you need to be. Whether you're in a classroom or a bedroom office, whether you have a degree or a dream, whether you're following the map or drawing your own, what matters is that you keep going. He turned off the lights and locked up the office, ready to head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to seize, and he'd face them the same way he'd faced everything since that day in the principal's office. With determination, humility, and the knowledge that the unconventional path is still a path forward, just a different one. And different, he'd learned, wasn't wrong. It was just different. And sometimes different is exactly what the world needs. 2 years after that tech conference speech, his life looked completely different. Not just financially, though, that had changed dramatically, but in ways he never expected when he first started this journey. The business had grown beyond anything he'd imagined back when he was fixing phones in people's kitchens. He was 26 now, and the company had reached a point where big players were noticing. A national IT firm had approached him with an acquisition offer. They wanted to buy his entire operation for $12 million. $12 million! The number was so absurd he'd laughed when he first heard it. But they were serious. They saw what he'd built. The client base, the proprietary software, the reputation for security, the team he'd assembled. They wanted all of it. The offer letter sat on his desk for 3 weeks. He'd pick it up, read it, put it down. $12 million would change everything. He could retire at 26. Never work another day in his life. His mom would never worry about money again. His sister could pursue any dream she wanted. He could fund his scholarship program at a level that actually made a difference. It was everything he'd worked for, wrapped up in a single signature. But something felt wrong about it. He'd wake up at night thinking about what would happen to his employees if he sold. The national firm had made no guarantees about keeping everyone on. His team, the people who'd stuck with him through the breach, through the rebuilding, through everything, they'd probably be let go or absorbed into some corporate structure where they were just numbers on a spreadsheet. And the clients, the small businesses who trusted him, because he understood what it meant to struggle, they'd become accounts managed by people who'd never had to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. He called a meeting with his core team. His business manager, his head of operations, his lead technician, and 2 other key people who'd been with him almost from the beginning. He told them about the offer. Watched their faces go through shock, excitement, then worry. "What do you want to do?" his business manager asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's why I'm asking you." The conversation went on for hours. Some thought he should take it. Life-changing money, escape from the stress, retirement at an age when most people were just starting their careers. Others felt it would betray what they'd built. This wasn't just a business to them. It was proof that doing things differently could work. That caring about people over profits wasn't naive. It was sustainable. His lead technician, a guy who'd been with him for 4 years, said something that stuck. "Look, man, it's your company. You built it. You nearly lost it. You rebuilt it. Whatever you decide, we'll understand. But I'll tell you this. I've worked for corporations before. I know what that life is like. This place is different. We're not just employees here. We matter. Our opinions count. We're building something together. That's rare. That's worth something beyond money." He turned down the offer, sent a polite email thanking them for their interest, but explaining that the company wasn't for sale. His lawyer thought he was crazy. His accountant ran the numbers 3 times, showing him exactly how much wealth he was walking away from. Even his mom, as supportive as she'd always been, asked if he was sure. "Baby, that's generational wealth. That's security forever." "I know, Mom. But I didn't drop out of school to build something just to sell it to the first big offer. I dropped out because the traditional path didn't fit me, selling to a corporation and walking away. That's the traditional exit strategy. I want to see how far we can take this on our own terms." Instead of selling, he did something different. He restructured the company to give key employees equity. Not much, but enough that they'd share in the success they were helping create. His business manager got 5%. His lead technician got 3%. Other long-term employees got smaller percentages. He went from owning 100% of an $8 million company to owning 75%. On paper, he'd just given away $2 million in value, but something changed after that. His team wasn't working for him anymore. They were working with him. The difference was subtle but profound. Ideas flowed more freely. People took more initiative. They treated challenges like shared problems to solve together, rather than issues to report to the boss. The company culture shifted from employer-employee to something more like partnership. The scholarship program he'd started grew too. What began as helping 5 kids a year turned into 20. He started partnering with community centers and nonprofits that worked with at-risk youth. Not all of them were dropouts. Some were still in school but needed support to pursue entrepreneurial projects. Some were graduates who couldn't afford college. Some were kids who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. He didn't care about their educational background. He cared about their drive. One of his scholarship recipients, a 19-year-old girl who'd left school to take care of her sick grandmother, had started a small business making custom jewelry. With the scholarship money, she'd bought better equipment and materials. A year later, her jewelry was being sold in boutiques across the state. She sent him a message that said simply, "You believed in me when no one else did." That changed everything. He kept that message. Read it whenever he doubted whether he'd made the right choice turning down that acquisition offer. His own relationship with education evolved too. He'd spent years being defensive about not finishing high school, like he had to constantly prove he was smart enough, capable enough, worthy enough. But he wasn't angry about it anymore. He'd made peace with his path. He'd even started taking courses again, not for a degree, but because he genuinely wanted to learn. Business strategy, leadership, advanced cybersecurity, learning for the sake of growth, not credentials. He got invited to speak at his old high school. The principal who'd watched him sign those withdrawal papers 9 years ago was still there. She looked older, more tired, but she remembered him. "I thought you were making a terrible mistake," she said before his talk. "I was sure I'd see you back here getting your GED, trying to recover from that decision." He smiled. You weren't wrong to worry. It could have gone that way. I got lucky in a lot of ways. Right time, right skills, right opportunities. But also, I worked harder than I've ever worked at anything. Speaking to those high school students was surreal. He looked at kids the same age he'd been when he left, and they looked so young. Had he really been that young when he made that massive decision? He didn't give them a speech about how dropping out was great. He was honest. For every story like mine, there are 10 stories of people who struggled for years, who regretted leaving, who had to fight 10 times harder for half the opportunities. I'm not here to tell you to drop out. I'm here to tell you that if you do, or if you have to, or if traditional paths don't work for you, you're not doomed. You just have a different road. And different roads take different kinds of strength. A student raised their hand during the Q&A. Do you think you would have been more successful if you'd stayed in school? The question caught him off guard. Would he have been? I don't know, he answered honestly. Maybe. Maybe I would have learned things that would have prevented mistakes I made. Maybe I would have had connections that made growth easier, but I also might not have had the same hunger, the same drive to prove myself. The truth is, we don't get to know what the other path would have looked like. We only get to make the best of the path we chose. The company hit a new milestone that year. 300 business clients, recurring revenue of $200,000 per month, and the software side growing faster than he'd projected. The valuation assessments came back at $15 million. He'd turned down $12 million 2 years ago, and now it was worth more. His accountant sent him an email with a smiley face emoji. Good call on not selling. But the number didn't excite him the way it might have once. The business had become about more than money. It was about creating jobs for people, providing reliable service to small businesses that needed it, proving that you could run a successful company without sacrificing your values, showing young people that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary places. The money was important, sure. It provided security and options. But it wasn't the point anymore. He started documenting everything, writing down the lessons he'd learned, the mistakes he'd made, the strategies that worked and the ones that failed spectacularly. He created a blog, then started a podcast, not to brag about his success, but to be honest about the reality of entrepreneurship. The good, the bad, the terrifying, the rewarding. Young entrepreneurs started reaching out, asking for advice, sharing their own struggles. He responded to every message he could, remembering how alone he'd felt at 17 with no one to guide him. His relationship with his old friends had gotten better too. That gap that felt so wide at 20 felt smaller at 26. They'd finished college, started careers, some were getting married or buying houses. They were living good, stable lives, and he was genuinely happy for them. No more defensive comparisons. No more needing to prove his path was better. Just acceptance that different people needed different roads, and that was okay. One of his old teammates from high school reached out. They met for coffee, and his friend talked about feeling stuck in his corporate job. I see what you built, and I wonder if I made the wrong choice playing it safe. He shook his head. Man, there is no wrong choice. You wanted stability, and you got it. I wanted autonomy, and I got it, but it cost me years of stability. We both paid for what we chose. That's just how it works. At 26, standing in his office, looking at the team he'd built and the lives he'd impacted, he finally understood something. Success wasn't about proving everyone wrong. It wasn't about the money or the valuation or the recognition. It was about building something that mattered, creating value for people and staying true to who you were even when it would have been easier to sell out or give up.